All right, so we're diving deep today into all this Aaron Rodgers and Pittsburgh Steelers talk.
Yeah, it's been everywhere, right?
I mean, everyone's seen the headlines, but we're going to really try and figure out what's actually going on here.
What it all means.
What it means for the Steelers, what it means for, the whole quarterback landscape. There was still this optimism within the organization that he might actually play for them.
Yeah, that stood out to me too a week later, and they're still feeling good about it.
A week later, that's not just, a polite meeting and you go your separate ways.
Right. It seems like there's some real substance there.
There's something more to it, and Schefter even mentioned this idea that the Steelers might have gotten some kind of loose assurance from Rodgers.
Interesting term, right?
Like, amid all this talk about Russell Wilson and free agency, that the Steelers had, reason to believe that Rodgers was at least, considering them pretty seriously.
So it wasn't just them, throwing their hat in the ring, hoping for the best.
Right. And what's interesting is Schefter kind of laid out the options, right? It's like Pittsburgh retirement or the Vikings changing their minds, which he said was highly unlikely.
Not going to happen.
So really it's like Pittsburgh or bust, and that puts the Steelers in a very unique position.
Yeah, because it gives Rodgers some leverage, right?
Exactly.
It's not like he's got a ton of other teams knocking on his door.
It's not a bidding war.
So the Steelers have to be careful.
And Schefter did confirm that they're all in on Rodgers, but he also mentioned something crucial.
Yeah.
They're also doing a lot of homework on these quarterbacks in the draft.
Yeah, that's the smart move, right?
So what do you make of that, like this kind of two-pronged approach?
Well, it tells me they're not naive. They know Rodgers isn't a long-term solution.
Right.
He's maybe a 2-year fix at best.
Right.
So they got to have a plan for the future, regardless of what happens with Rodgers.
Yeah, and Schefter even kind of, alluded to this internal debate within the Steelers. Like, do we set a deadline for Rodgers, or do we just focus on our draft strategy?
Do we try to move up?
Do we move up? Do we move down? Are we targeting, Shedeur Sanders, Tyler Show?
Tough decisions.
What's the risk-reward there?
Well, I mean, the risk is you wait too long for Rodgers, and then the quarterback you really want in the draft is gone. Right, but on the flip side, you could use a high draft pick on a quarterback.
Yeah.
And then Rodgers decides to come to Pittsburgh, and now you've got an unproven rookie when you thought you were going to be competing for a Super Bowl.
Oh, yeah, tough spot.
Yeah, and remember, Schefter said the timeline for Rodgers' decision is very loose and very vague.
Oh, yeah, that doesn't help.
So the Steelers are in a tough spot.
And speaking of timelines and decisions, we do have to address the Russell Wilson news.
Oh, yeah, big development there.
Huge development. He has signed with the New York Giants.
1-year deal up to $21 million.
Quite a deal.
$10.5 million guaranteed.
Wow. And Schefter mentioned the Giants were one of the teams Wilson was talking to, along with the Browns and, of course, the Steelers.
Right. So another option off the table.
So what does this mean for Rodgers in Pittsburgh?
Well, it's one less potential landing spot for Rodgers if things don't work out with the Steelers.
Right.
Even though Rodgers and Wilson are different quarterbacks. The Giants filling their need means one less alternative for Rodgers.
Okay, so let's shift gears now and talk about First Take.
All right, love those guys.
They really dove into the Steelers' current quarterback situation. The big question they posed was, can the Steelers really move forward with Mason Rudolph as their starting quarterback?
That's the million-dollar question, right?
And their arguments stem from looking at the Steelers' recent performance, right?
Yeah.
No playoff wins since 2016.
Ouch.
Offense struggling to score points.
Consistently under 17 points in recent games.
Yeah, so they're basically saying this team needs a huge upgraded quarterback.
They need someone who can come in and make a difference right away.
Right, and they highlighted how that puts the Steelers in this really tough spot.
Yeah.
Because it seems like Rodgers is their top target. But if that falls through, they don't have a lot of great alternatives.
Right. They even threw out some names like Joe Flacco, Carson Wentz, Drew Lock.
Yeah, not exactly inspiring.
Not the guys you want leading your team to a Super Bowl.
And this is where the First Take debate got really interesting, because they asked, is Rodgers at this point in his career really that much better than someone like Russell Wilson would have been for the Steelers?
Right. They acknowledged Rodgers' higher ceiling.
Right.
But they also pointed out he's not a long-term solution either.
Right. So it's that classic, win now versus build for the future.
Exactly.
And First Take even brought up the Steelers management. Specifically, the possibility of Justin Fields leaving.
Interesting part.
Given his youth and, some of the potential he showed. They questioned why the Steelers would let him go, especially with all this uncertainty around Rodgers.
Yeah, what's the thinking there?
And I think the underlying sentiment was, if the Steelers are this desperate for a quarterback to the point where they're banking on a player like Rodgers,
right,
then they must not think very highly of Fields' potential to be a championship caliber quarterback.
Yeah, it's like they're saying the Steelers must think Fields isn't the guy.
Right. And they really emphasized how much leverage that gives Rodgers in this whole situation.
He's holding all the cards.
Now, before we wrap up, we should at least touch on the Stefon Diggs trade.
Oh, yeah. Big move.
Big move. He's going to the Patriots.
3 years, $69 million.
And it almost felt like a counterpoint to this whole quarterback saga.
Right.
Like, the Patriots saw a need on offense, and they went out and addressed it decisively.
Got themselves a proven playmaker.
They didn't wait around. They didn't, hope for the best. They went out and got their guy.
And Diggs was really productive for the Texans before his injury.
Right. So he brings that immediate impact and, leadership to a young Patriots offense.
Exactly.
So as we kind of put all this together, what are your main takeaways about the Steelers and this Aaron Rodgers situation?
Well, it's clear the Steelers are very interested in Rodgers, and they seem willing to wait for him to make a decision. But with Russell Wilson now off the board, that's one less option for Rodgers, which could increase the pressure on both sides to make a move. And we also see this internal struggle within the Steelers.
Right.
They want to win now, which is why Rodgers is so appealing.
Yeah.
But they also need to think about the future, which is why they're doing all this work on the draft.
Makes sense.
And the questions around Justin Fields just add another layer to all of this.
Yeah, it's a fascinating situation. And, for you, the listener,
absolutely,
you've now got a much clearer understanding of, what's at stake here.
You see the Steelers' urgency.
You see their options or lack thereof.
And how these other quarterback moves are impacting the situation.
Exactly. So with all that in mind, I want to leave you with a question.
Yeah.
Considering everything we've discussed.
Yeah.
How much leverage do you really think Aaron Rodgers has in this negotiation?
That's the key question.
And maybe even more importantly, what do you think would be the riskiest move for the Steelers right now? Do they keep waiting for Rodgers with the draft approaching? Or do they risk passing on a promising young quarterback because they're holding out hope for Rodgers?
Tough choices.
Tough choices. And, the implications of this decision
absolutely
could be huge for the Steelers and for the NFL as a whole.
Yeah, we'll be watching closely.
All right, thanks for tuning in to The Deep Dive.
See you next time.